Amy is a product manager with Xybion Corporation and is going to take us through this presentation of the value of closed-loop compliance and integrated quality management systems. Amy, without further introduction, I'd like to have you come on and start the presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm pleased to be able to present EQCM and what it means in terms of the value of what closed-loop compliance means and integrated quality management system. Now, for the agenda today, real quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about integration and the definitions and benefits. We're going to go through the concept of closed-loop compliance. It's a term that's being thrown out more and more in the marketplace. Provide a little bit of an introduction to EQCM, and then we'll get right into the live demo. Today's demo is going to be a very high level because there's a lot to cover in EQCM, and certainly if you need any further drill down, deep dive type of demos, you're welcome to get back in touch with Kevin and arrange that at a future time. And then as we come off the demo, we're just going to have a very short discussion on hosted versus on-premise type of solutions, because EQCM is now offered both ways, and there are some advantages, pros and cons, to doing it one way or the other. Integration, the Webster definition is an act or instance of combining something into a whole part. Where most people typically think of integration, everyone claims to have, quote, integrated systems. And what they typically mean is what I call intra-systems. So within their own application or solution software, they have the parts integrated to each other, which allows reusability of the different components as well as relations within that same system. And then a lot of the IT groups then will come and say, well, we're also looking for integrated applications, and what they're often talking about is inter-system integration or inter-application integration, where they're looking for connections from one system into an external system to reuse again and share, push-pull, that type of data. But integration is really, instead of looking at just that two-dimensional aspect, it has a lot more dimensions. There's almost 3 dimensions or even 4 to that. And what I mean by that is if you have to look at integrations, we've already talked about the systems, the inter and intra-system type of integration. And there's a little bit broader aspect to that. When we're looking at integration there, you can look at it at a very granular level, from a field basis, all the way up to a whole set of records. So integration alone is not enough just to integrate module to module or system to system, but it needs to have the flexibility to go from a very granular or to a very coarse scale with integration. Another interesting thing, too, is beyond just modular integration, a finer level than that is the dimension of processes. So, for example, you may want to have a customer request process kick off a corrective action process, or an audit kick off a corrective action. And it's interesting that no 2 customers have ever had the same corrective action processes, and in fact, some will employ more than one corrective action process. They may have one for level 3 types of issues in their organization and different ones that they follow. So it's critical to go to that level of looking at all the business processes, which ultimately become workflows in a solution, and try to integrate those together. And finally, it may seem a little odd, but stakeholder integration. And why that's important is a system needs to be able to pull all the various stakeholders, or what I call the value chain, into the solution and be able to utilize that. So from the C-level down to the very basic end user, to customers, suppliers, etc., all the stakeholders need to have access and have the various security so that they can see, view, have the transparency throughout the organization, but with respect to and keeping the security intact. And it's also critical to have a system that is maintainable over time and changes with the needs of the stakeholders, so that way they can keep the adoption rate high and you don't lose some of the end users because they're either don't understand the intuitiveness of the system or it's not applicable anymore. Now, for example, in this case, when we look at the process-to-process integration, there's obviously a value. So when we're talking about end-to-end compliance, You can imagine how if a complaint is started and it automatically flows into an audit, or for example a nonconformance, which then leads to a risk assessment, which then leads to a corrective action. And that part of that corrective action may mean that a new document requires modification. Either a new document needs to be done or created, or an older document needs to be revised. And finally, that training needs to take place on these documents. So that value of integration is not just about efficiency, so that way you don't have to redo the data, you don't have to look for the data. It's basically pushing and streamlining that flow out to you. But it's really helpful to manage the risk because you're reusing the data that's already entered, you're flowing that through the system, and one critical thing, and where I hear a lot of complaints in the market, it's like people who don't have systems in place or that don't like their systems say things are falling through the cracks. So by having an automated or integrated system from end to end, those activities are not omitted anymore. And of course you have the continuous improvement because you can go from the reactive side over into the strategic side of that audit and risk management. Now with integration, as we park that little circle in the middle, so that process integration is critical, but that needs to sit in a larger framework, and that's where I talk about that system-to-system integration. So a good system also has to go outside of itself and use different tools and processes down to the field level or down to the record level or sets of records to pull in the right records at the right time. So it may be a push or a pull. That not only includes typical records from ERPs, CMMSs, for example, but also content from document management systems. And when we talk about that third level of integration, that stakeholder integration, that's taking that whole system and ensuring through the right notifications, through the right alerts, through the right flagging, through the right reports, through the right collaborative interfaces, through the right security, that each user in the organization has the right views, has the right customized reviews. They have the transparency to the data that the security allows them, and real critically, that they have the accountability. So when items are coming overdue, when people are not acting, when things are becoming late or the age of becoming aged, then that becomes apparent to the organization and they can take action on that quite readily. Now, I've talked about integration for quite a bit, but really the way that that integration is manifested or implemented is through total closed-loop compliance. So that's the method to bring all this together and what we at Xybion practice. So the term closed-loop compliance, you can think of it as really end-to-end total compliance. It's a way for an organization to take a system and from the beginning of all their business processes to make sure it flows and automates to the end to ensure that that organization is doing the critical activities, collecting the critical records, and running the correct reports to allow them to be in compliance with the regulatory mandates, customer requirements, and internal needs of the organization. Now this pyramid that's presented here shows a little bit about the aspect of closed-loop compliance. It's not just about the application and infrastructure, and what's included in that, of course, is that integration between the modules that we've talked about, but it's also about building into a system what we call regulatory compliance and validation best practices. So within the system, it's not just going to be a blank slate or a platform. Closed-loop compliance goes above that and provides not only a robust platform, but builds in things such as field libraries, process flows, logical business rules that are in keeping with the traditional quality management type of regulations, or the SOX regulations for financial disclosures, or for example the ERM type guidance for risk management within organizations. In addition, a good closed-loop compliance system, it's great to have business processes, but in addition to managing your activities in your organization, you also have to provide content. So this might be your documents, your records within your organization. It's not enough just to push activities to people, to-do lists, but most of the time those are associated with forms. People have to fill in data, they have to run reports. In addition, no two organizations, as I mentioned, have the same processes. So a good solution, a closed-loop compliance solution, doesn't force a specific business process, a particular workflow, on an organization. Rather, it allows the organization to take the tools, the business process designer, and create a workflow that maps to and aligns with their own processes. And as we move up the pyramid, we come to the role of collaboration. So again, that's providing that interface, the workflows, the views, the tools available to the organization. So under a single integrated solution, all the correct stakeholders can work together to see where there are trends, to see where there are problems, to communicate issues back and forth, and to ensure that all of those activities are being managed and monitored in a timely fashion. And a small piece of that is, again, because a good solution doesn't just give you something completely out of the box. You get what you get, and there's no more to it. A good solution allows some customization, or what we call configuration, on top of it in order to align those processes, to put in those forms, to put the right logos, to put the right fields, and to really map that to your business processes. This is where the end users have the higher adoption rate, because then the system looks like something they need, and it's very similar to what they would expect to see. The value of a total closed-loop compliance, some of this is probably quite obvious. It really lowers the total cost of quality. One of the main reasons is because this platform, all the tools, the solution, the modules, they come out of the box. So they're pre-configured. But the beauty of it is it allows for that I hate to say it, customization. It's really more configuration by the end user. So it's extensible to go into the different processes that the customer needs. Also, with the lower cost of quality, because it's sustainable over time. And we're going to take a look at this as I get into the live demo. It's sustainable over time because not only the processes can grow, but the processes can be modified quite easily without a lot of effort or IT knowledge. So by doing that, if there are changes in your organization, you have changes to your business process, you're not stranded with a system that can't change. The system can change with the organization. And because of the integration aspects of the system, of course it can leverage what you already have in place for your existing IT assets. So your ERP systems, your CMMS systems, your financial data systems. Those types of assets you don't want to recreate, but instead reuse that information where it makes sense and integrate it to a total quality system. And besides the lower cost of quality, which is critical to organizations in this marketing environment, they also have a reduced risk of non-compliance. And that's really critical to ensure that companies and organizations are meeting the regulatory mandates as well as internal mandates that they might have. So a closed-loop system is, again, going to provide those notifications, that trending, those flags, to provide early warning. It's not just going to look at the reactive, such as incident management, but it's really going to focus on that proactive, that risk management, that early detection type of system to reduce the amount of incidents before they occur. So those are some of the values. Now with EQCM, an introduction to EQCM that I've talked about already is that it has several different types of modules within the system. Some of those include the nonconformances, the quality management, which is really an over-tier of nonconformances, corrective actions and preventative actions, complaint management, for example. Again, it's a very broad system, and we won't have time to touch each one of these components today. But these are modularized, and the benefit of that is that companies can grow into the system and start implementing the modules that they need to right away. But as we've talked about, the key is the system is completely integrated, so you don't lose anything by putting one module in place. because all the modules are integrated together. Now, in addition to the integration between the modules, a lot of companies, and it was hinted on a previous slide, have content that's available in other systems, such as OpenText or SharePoint, Documentum, or any other CMIS version 1 compliant platform. So the beauty of our system is it not only allows companies to integrate content that they're keeping in EQCM to these various records, but they can also integrate back to these other systems if their content is residing in those. And I know we want to get right into the live demo, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is a blow-up to show all of the components that are critical for a good closed-loop compliance system, up from the administration aspects where security, e-signatures, audit trail is critical, up to the higher levels where we have things such as a solution builder, so you can design your own workflows, design your own forms. So it puts that configurability in the power of the users instead of keeping it with the vendor. And again, the Content Connect, which I alluded to in a previous slide, this is important because what I hear from a lot of customers is, well, I want to migrate a lot of my documents to EQCM, but I still have some in SharePoint, I have some residing. With large corporations, they have them perhaps residing in multiple repositories. So the key is to have a way to integrate that critical content from all those systems and bring it into one central repository, one central area. EQCM benefits, we talked about the value of integration. We talked about the value of closed-loop compliance. Of course, EQCM being a closed-loop compliance system brings those benefits. There are a few more as far as flexible. The system has that high configurability to allow that sustainability and scalability over time. Trustworthy, that was one thing that wasn't mentioned in the previous slide, and it's worth noting, is that the system has been audited over and over again. So it has been not only audited to ensure that it meets the requirements of the users, the requirements of the regulations, but it's also had threat and security auditing on that as well, and penetration tests for systems that are sitting in a hosted environment to ensure that these systems are secure for our users and our customers. And now, without further ado, I want to bring us into the live demo, which you've been waiting for. And again, with today's demonstration, I won't be able to cover everything, but there's a few critical things that are worth noting. And before I get into the system, I want to note as I bring up my email that EQCM is highly configurable to work with your email system. And why this is so critical is that end users, for the most part, are heavily reliant on their email system. And if you just follow your email trail, as I call it, because the system is completely automated, it's pushing these notifications out, it's warning the users, it's warning supervisors when things are overdue. If you follow your email trail, it will basically lead you into the system and give you the links of what you need to do. So if you need to take an action in the system, there will be a live link to follow, as well as links to documents into these configurable notifications. So these are all configurable, and these notifications can be set up for basically any type of transaction, overdue, coming due, etc. So I did want to bring that up, because I'm not going to go in and out of the email system to show that today. Also, when we come into the system, we're going to note I'm going to log in as two different users today. And the first user is an end user that has very little, very few privileges. And I might note as I'm logging in, there's also single sign-on connection. So when we talk about integration, it's also about integration to your IT network. So the system will allow single sign-on, Active Directory type of authentication. And what's nice is it uses it in a mixed model, which means you can have contractors log in with set passwords, but for the employees in your company, you can use Active Directory. Now, as Joe user logs in, he has a very configurable, or what we call customizable, My Page. And the My Page is that landing page of things he can do. Also, his view is constrained by his security, so what he has access to is very limited. And again, this gets down to that adoptability by the end users. You want it to be simple, and you want to make sure that they can only see the records they need to. Now, as Joe comes into the system, we can also quickly change his look and look at just his favorite documents, the My Tasks, and the things he can do. Now, this is important because for an end user, for the 80% of people in the organization, we want to make sure they're doing their tasks, filling out a form, doing an activity, reading a document before they perform a critical activity within the organization, or perhaps if an event happens, such as they detect a non-conformance on a product line, on a production line, someone slips and trips in the organization, any type of event, they can start to log those rather rapidly and not lose time. So a closed-loop system is going to provide this all at their fingertips. So as I log into the system, they will see their tasks, and again, it's configurable so they can see flags, alert colors, overdue, and they can decide if they want to pull in additional information into the screen, which makes it customizable for them. On the standpoint of the favorites, because again, we have a document management system where users and companies can keep their content, as well as tie it through that CMIS connector to other content repositories. At their fingertips, they can then have access to their documents. Their documents could include something, not only SOPs, people traditionally use it for SOPs, work instructions, controlled forms, any type of study information if you're in the pharmaceutical world as well. But it also can be used, more interestingly, to embed a typical document. You can use to embed documents inside of documents, and even EQCM functions inside of other EQCM functions. So for example, from a simple workflow, I can get to my facility work instructions inside of EQCM, and I can even launch a process. So companies can start to become very creative of how they're using their document management, and not just for documents, but they can use it actually to control what users are seeing and to lead them along in the process. And that then will start the flow for that particular incident near-miss report. So that can be embedded inside of an SOP or inside of another document. Now I'm going to go in and log out. I'm going to go in as Amy and log out as Joe. And this will give us a slightly different view. And the reason why I want to do a different view is because Joe had very limited access. And today we're looking at a full quality management system. So a full quality management system will have access to more modules and features. So that way that organization can not only control their documentation and their activities, but they can also start looking at corrective actions, non-conformances, etc. So as I log in as Amy, I will see that my screen and my menu is, and as far as my page, the layout looks different than what Joe had access to. Now I should mention the planning pane is critical. So from a management perspective, we talked a little bit about transparency and accountability. I can not only see my own tasks within the organization and take action on them, but I can also see the tasks of people who work for me. So it's not just about doing your own task, but it's allowing people to see records and to see items that are overdue. And not only that, but to take action on them. So as I can see the items that are coming up, I can see that we have several that are overdue. I can ask for a request follow-up to be generated. or I can just reassign it. With our system, we ensure that we've put features in to prevent bottlenecking in workloads. So with the reassignment, with auto-delegation, with out-of-office features, the system can run a task from one person to another delegated person as well. Within the My Tasks as well, the end user can search and filter, and we're going to see that on another screen as we get into the records. But the great thing about the system, it allows the end users to set their searches, to save their searches, and so they can get to the data rather rapidly as they go through the system. Now I'm going to launch a process, and we're going to follow that process through the whole through a couple steps. And the reason why we want to do that is we want to take a look at what it looks like to the end user. We've spent time on the My Tasks, which is important because at the end of every process, if you think about it, processes are comprised of steps, or if you want to call it activities. Somebody has to do something. So Joe has to fill out a form, then Sue needs to review it, and then the quality managers need to add some data to that, etc. So each of one of those parts of that process or workflow basically boils down to a task. And so it's critical to monitor the tasks. But to the end user, to get that started, they can go into the Start New Processes, and they can launch a new process. So for example, I'm going to create an incident process today. But what I show you on incident is true for corrective action, it's true for complaint management, etc. It basically works with the same type of mechanism, that we're creating a workflow or process, and it is taking all of the workflow rules and then pushing it out to the appropriate people to take the appropriate actions at the appropriate time. Now as we get into the process itself, I want to note a couple things. At the top, we have a planning screen. So this is actually showing the logistics or the agenda, the order of the process. So in this process, we have a logging form followed by investigation, which will automatically launch a corrective action plan, followed by a review, and then if certain conditions are met, it will launch a full CAPA with a root cause analysis, etc. Now why I'm showing this is important because eQCM has that way to just not only fill in a record, like a lot of systems do, but it's really workflow based. So you can thread these forms together automatically with the notifications, with all the business rules. So again, that once someone says, I have an incident, that the process is then self-automated until it reaches the end. So hence the closed loop compliance. I'm going to close that, and we're going to take a look a little bit about the form itself. 80% of what people do, in fact maybe closer to 90%, is essentially gets down to filling out forms. So someone is collecting data, and at the end someone's going to monitor and run reports. But the biggest logistics is for someone to fill out a form or to review a form that's been filled out. And within the system, these forms are completely configurable by the end user. So when we talk about configurability and that flexibility and sustainability moving forward, the advantage is all this is configurable. The business rules, the default of what is being populated, and the information, the types of fields that are being input into the system as well. Now I'm not going to spend my time filling out all of these fields because that would take a while to do. So I've made them optional as opposed to required. But we can pop in as well long instruction fields. So the beauty of this is if you're a company that has paper forms right now, or even if you have another system, there are probably these forms that you're filling out, and we can take those and model them in the system and collect the data and then push it into a workflow. So all that information can be collected and like I said, put into the workflow. And the beauty of it is once it's in the system, then it can be used for searches, it can be used for reports, etc. And finally, as I scroll down in my form to the end, you'll see that we also have an attachment component and a document component. And I just wanted to bring that up again because that integration means that we can connect those documents into an incident, for example. You can have pictures of an accident and you can attach those. You can link this incident back to equipment, which is kept in our support modules. And again, with that integration, perhaps equipment is kept in a system you already have, so we can point to that instead. So all those linkages become critical, so you, as an organization, you can start to, what I say, slice and dice and determine where your incidences, where your issues, where your findings are coming from, and start to take action, more preventative action on those. And as I complete that process, that workflow behind the scenes, what's been designed already knows who gets the next task, what the next form looks like, if there's a review or approval sequence that's required, and any other type of business rules on the system. So that is the way that we create these incidences or the near misses. Now I'm going to switch back to my own active tasks. As I mentioned before, we can set the different filters in the system and toggle between them to find our data at a very rapidly. So from the end user, they're filling out the forms. Here's my incident investigation that's just been popped into my workload automatically, and I've received a notification. But that's from the end user standpoint. From the manager standpoint, again, to have that stakeholder integration, it's critical to get the managers involved so they can monitor, review, and just see the trending in these records over time, even if they don't participate on a specific record. So that's where in the system we go above just the end user view, and we have the views so people can look at their different records in the system. Excuse me. These also allow that same filtering capability, and we can have quick searches as well as advanced searches. And in the system, we can quickly see that we have 2 items that are overdue. I can look across here and I see that one had a CAPA required. And luckily, it looks like someone started a CAPA. So this screen not only functions for the managers as a way to find the records, to view the records that they have the security to see, but to drill down to see some quick information. So this is currently at the corrective action plan. It's passed through all of the different items. I can see how long each person took, and I can see, yes, indeed, there is a corrective action that was already launched on this. So it functions for that drill down, and in case someone does need to take action, they could reassign at this point or open it. And finally, besides that view, it's one thing to put data in, it's another thing to view, and it's quite another thing, and what most people find most critical is to produce reports on these records so they can take them to management meetings, etc. So with the system, of course, we have that reporting capability that allows us to grab the records, filter them, and then create reports. Now the nice thing is that this does not take an IT expert, because you don't have to know specialized reporting tools. It's really quite simple. What you can report on is on your left. What you've selected is on your right. So if you want to grab age, you want to move it over, the alert level, everything that you've created in your process is available, and you can sort it and you can group it. And then, of course, you can run it into different formats, Word, Excel, etc., to produce the report. And you can hit a preview of that to get your report that you desire. And so it can produce graphs with a click. It can group items with a click. And if you don't like that particular report, you want to take some items out, it's very simple. You can just take that report, I didn't want this field, done, and you save it again, and you have a new report. So the capability to produce reports is, one, it's user-friendly. 2, it allows you to create multiple reports rapidly, and you can create it based on just the data that you want. You're not constrained. But beyond those type of reports where management can get a feel or a look of the specific records, they may also want to see if the system as a whole is designed efficiently. Or in other words, that's great. I see that I've got 20 different incidences, but did I really design my process well? And this is where we get into what we call more of the trending or the process statistics. So again, a good closed-loop compliance system will not only start at the beginning when there's a problem, but through the whole way to the end. The end of the process is not when the CAPA is launched or when the CAPA is completed. The end is when the continuous improvement actions are taken in the organization. So the CAPAs have been reviewed, they've been analyzed, and then the next step of that continuous improvement is done. And within our process statistics, you can roll up to the highest level, or you can drill down to any level that you've set, and this is completely flexible. So again, to guide that security, to guide that roll-up, it allows the flexibility. And by doing this, it provides you that trending over time of basically, do I have more incidences that are being opened? Am I completing them quicker? How long is it taking me? So if I look across these, I see my investigation process is averaging 52 days. So this may alert the organization that I have an inefficient process, that essentially, or the people in that process at that point are unclear of what to do. So the organization can take the appropriate action. Now the question comes up often, well, that's great, you have these processes, these workflows, but what if I need to change it? Is it really that hard? For many systems out on the market, it is hard. You have to call the vendor and they go away for a couple months and they come back with the changes. But with EQCM, that part of being scalable and flexible means that, you know what, if you don't see what you need in our process, you create your own user-defined field. So your text fields, your pick list fields, create any type of field you want, numerical, monetary, etc. Or if you see the fields you want, but maybe the process isn't quite right. So you can go into the system and grab a process. So I have several processes just in this area. And for example, my issuance process, if I've got an issue, I could create a process for it, and I say, you know what, it needs more than just logging and correcting. I really need a review. So it's as simple as saying, I want a review step. Who's going to do it? Selecting the various types of leaders, setting all the different options, putting that up, and then grabbing what kind of form do you want. So let's hit the form library. Let's grab a few more fields. We can set the properties on those fields, and essentially we're done. So to set these different processes and to maintain these workflows over time is simple to do, and that's really critical so you don't get stranded with the system. And these are versioned. So if you don't like what you've done, if you're new to setting these up, you can roll back if you don't like the results. So that's true. And one other thing I should mention is that in the system, we have the traditional quality management items. But what's really exciting is that we have a very new feature called Solution Builder. Because people liked our solutions so well that people were creating HR processes within action. People were using the nonconformance module for purchasing. People were using our traditional quality modules to do all sorts of things. So we said, you know what? We're going to let you build your own modules. And that, what you see here on the screen, is a function of that. So taking that, I was able to create a lobbying system, a GLP system, an EHS system, and it goes on and on. And you can set this up and decide how these even appear on your screen. So you can take this extensible system and use it because of that workflow power and that documentation power, and move it out to other aspects of the organization. So it's very powerful in that respect. And I talked a lot about incidents. I talked a lot about corrective actions. Of course, the system also comes with audit management. Audit management is a little bit unusual because it's not just a reactive type of process, but it also requires a lot of pre-planning. So our audit program allows people to create a sandbox, if you will, of the audits they plan for the next year, see if people are available, look at conflicts, and try to schedule that out before they actually ever happen. And then as those events happen, they can, again, it becomes a workload task within people's different areas, whatever they're doing. So if they're the auditor, they might have an execution task where they have to conduct the audit, or perhaps they just have to plan the audit. And I'm going to bring up this because this is important, again, with that integration. And this is just one step of the audit. So in my audit process, I have a planning step. And that planning step says I'm going to send one auditor out into the field. And that auditor is going to be given a set of questionnaires, which there's a questionnaire library in our system, and you can build your questionnaires. And we're going to tie that audit to these what we call audited elements. So this integration is yet another critical piece because you can take an audit and you could be auditing risks. So our system has a complete risk management capability. You can identify, assess, and score your risks throughout your organization and take mitigative action. And we can use those to audit against those risks. So you can audit the highest risk areas of your company. We can audit things such as equipment and all the documents in the system. So everything that's in the system is a component that can be audited. And what that means is that as the audit's being conducted, and this again is just the planning, so as the audit's being conducted and you have findings, then we can really start to parse out where are the findings coming from within the organization. What do they belong to? Where's the highest risk area within the organization? And just like we did with nonconformance, we can run reports on the findings, roll them up into audits, or run reports from the audit on down to look at the findings. And again, as I went through this very rapidly and was talking about these forms where we're connecting documents, what sits behind those connections is something much more powerful than just a simple, like a file share, if you will. What we have in our document management system allows companies to not only have a very robust full-text search, advanced searches, quick searches, but they can also put their documents into a folder structure, manage those documents, send those out for review sequence, approval sequence, distribution, read and understood, and generate the to be read and understood reports. These can be PDF, these can be controlled, these can be managed at a high level for all the properties called document classes. And so all that documentation in the organization, they can be managed quite easily and in a very controlled fashion so that just the right users are getting the documents at the right time. So that's a very high level. That integration approach, again, ensures that the stakeholders, the end users, the C-level through the reporting and through the process statistics, the managers through the viewing, and also through the reports and the supervisor views, they can see the information they need. The managers in the future then, for sustainability purposes,